Our working day or our I would like to invite Mykola Vorobiov, who's the director of the Center of European Perspectives in Washington, D.C., will be talking about annual results of the national diplomats' activity abroad, what's happening in the U.S., how Ukraine is perceived in the U.S., and what needs to be done next. Good morning, esteemed colleagues. I would like to thank Ukrainian Crisis Media Center for inviting me. I was introduced. I'm for the last year and a half we've been working in Washington, D.C. We started working actively in January 2015. I was in the U.S. in the beginning of Maidan, during Maidan in the beginning of February, when there were all the main events taking place. I have some experience of work with different organizations where the decision makers or policy makers are people who make decisions as to Ukraine. And on these people, the future of our country depends, especially from the economic and political point of view. Most 80% of international support comes from the U.S. According to the UN, they are the guarantor of the security of Ukraine, so I would pay more attention to the work of Ukrainian diplomats, and I would pay more attention to work with the U.S. There are some figures, as we are people's deputies. I can talk about what's happening in Congress and different institutions of the U.S., what they think about Ukraine, what are their plans as to Ukraine and the whole region. In April 2015, the topic of Ukraine was one of top four topics as to international policy of the U.S. Unfortunately, during the last half a year, the topic of Ukraine is not even within top 10 because of the events in Syria, because of the military conflict and other hot places. And now the task of diplomats and journalists is to support this topic. The good news is that if the U.S. Remember Russia, then Ukraine goes together with the Russian aggression and Putin's regime. So this message is to be used. As to information coverage, it's not sufficient now. As we know, the Ministry of Information had in its projects starting the broadcasting in foreign languages, but because there's no financing, there's no broadcasting like that. There was an idea to set up the channel Ukraine Tomorrow, but on the other hand, Russia Today TV channel, its budget is approximately $450–500 million. Just in the U.S. They have offices in 4 cities, Washington, New York, Los Angeles, and Miami. They are in all the hotels practically. If in Washington you see average people, not experts, people who do not know about the situation in Ukraine, who watch TV, for them Russia Today is an important source of information, because if there is Russian management working there, the journalists are the representatives of Russian diaspora and other American professionals who work, who do their job well, and this job is well financed. According to our assessment, Russia spends from $2 to $3 billion just for propaganda in the U.S. This work is taking place via Russian embassy, via lobbyists and so-called advocates. If we know that American lobbyists, especially if they have international clients, they have to be registered in certain databases, the database of the Justice Department, the lawyers, the consultants or advocates who are hired by Russians. It's difficult to know who they are. You can recognize them just somewhere in the Congress, but their voice is of importance, and we need to explain to Americans, especially to decision makers, to journalists, what's happening in reality. As to information policy of Ukraine, Ukraine is officially represented by one journalist only from Ukrinform, and the budget hasn't been changed since 2009 for this journalist. So being in the situation of information war, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and other organizations and the state is not doing enough to expand Ukrainian lobby in the U.S. And that is where the destiny of Ukraine is decided. As to activity of the lobbyists, there are some lobbyists among them, people who support the interests of Ukraine. These are Ukrainian diaspora, the so-called supporters of Ukraine, professional lobbyists who just voluntarily, because this work is not financed, they are trying to explain to local people what's happening in Ukraine. They are saying that Ukraine is a strategic partner of the United States and it deserves bigger support. So basically, there is organization Razom, our Center for Eastern European Perspectives, is doing everything to influence the foreign policy of the U.S. to explain the situation on the ground. Another work of the consultants is information as to, for example, legislation which is passed in the Congress and Ukraine Freedom Support Act, which provides for $500 million of support for Ukraine, which was passed in December last year. Today, the task of our center in Washington is to promote the interests of Ukraine and to do a lot of so-called surgical work, because there are organizations which are in fundraising, helping ATO soldiers, but our task is to do more specific work. We have done more than 250 presentations during the last year and a half. We were doing it for Wilson Center, Kettering Institute, George Washington University Broad Learning, Congress of the U.S., all the main institutions where decisions are made on Ukraine. 80% of the information that we provided on Maidan, on NATO, ATO zone, on what's happening with fighting corruption, about 80% of the information was absolutely something new for Americans. So this work is very important. Parallel to that, our center informs the public of Ukraine from Washington, from the U.S., on what's happening there. We were published in such publications as Новое Время, Хвиля, in Facebook, Громадське TV, Левый берег, and other publications. The task of the organization is to serve as a reliable bridge for informal bridge between the U.S. and Ukraine and the region of Eastern Europe, because so that I can talk to Henry Kissinger, Ian Brzezinski. Well, I talked to them. They are trying to help to Ukraine, but many specific details which could be analyzed, they could be analyzed only if you are here in Ukraine. To understand Ukraine, to understand Russia, you have to know the language and to spend some time here to provide some grounded advice or proposals. In this case, we would like to continue communication with Ukrainian public, understanding how decisions are made within the U.S. politics, and also to communicate with different think tanks and congressmen. Informal relations, they are more important, more influential than the formal protocol meetings. And some more figures. The military support in accordance with the defense budget of U.S. For the next year is $300 million. And our assessment is that this is quite insignificant financing, and Ukraine could have received much more support. Ukraine will get 15-20%, is receiving 15-20% of what we could receive. What is 300 million? That's the budget for the campaign with fighting ISIL, and that's a monthly budget. 300 million a year is a good amount. Nevertheless, this is the message for international community that the U.S. stays with Ukraine, but this support is not significant, even comparing to what are the relations with such countries as Georgia, Israel, Turkey. They open their think tanks just opposite the White House to promote the national interests of their countries. And I believe this amount could have been much bigger, and the same is the situation with treating our wounded servicemen, because we know that there are several hundreds of them in Maryland. I met some of the veterans. Americans have very good experience of rehabilitation of military. They have the whole infrastructure. They have all the psychological support. And here, much more could have been done. We could have thousands of our veterans being treated there. Americans, for example, know very well about the Vietnamese syndrome, and so they could provide psychological assistance, and there could be cooperation between Ukrainian servicemen and American servicemen.
As for the plans for the ongoing year, the next year we plan to open representative office in Washington, D.C. And in order to make our work more efficient, we should pay more attention and keep orientation with the future presidential administration. If we wish to understand the importance of Ukraine for the U.S., we might recollect that there were not less than 40 official visits since the beginning of Maidan, and Vice President Biden visited Ukraine 4 times during the last 3 years and 2 years, and the President of Ukraine visited also the United States 2 times And the latest occasion was visiting the UN Security and Defense Council. Valery Charlie was appointed the ambassador only this year. Actually, because before this moment of the new appointment, Mr. Mozak, the former ambassador, did not play sufficiently proactive role, which is needed for the period of war, for the country in war. Vice President Joe Biden and current administration will work a year more, and in January 2017 we will see new president, and today we can approximately assume who might be the president, and we have five presidents, possible candidates, Madam Hillary, Mr. George Bush, the younger, Marco Rubio, or Micah Rubio, or maybe David Trump. Some of the candidates are senators. Their offices are rather open, and I might provide Ukrainian diplomats with a piece of advice to maintain contacts with these offices and try to establish good relations now. That's it. I think I would like to thank to all of you and to all our colleagues who facilitated our trip. We planned a visit for just 1 month, and then we spent almost 4 months there after beginning of the war. I believe that American support is very important for us. Sometimes I hear from the diplomats that Americans, Australians, Canadians, they are our partners. They are our Western partners. That's not exactly like this. I believe that the entire policy supported by the European Union is made in the United States, and that's why we should not underestimate this factor. And now I'm ready to answer your questions. Thank you. What are the sources most persuasive and most trusted by Ukrainian diaspora in the United States? I think the main problem of the Ukrainian diaspora in the United States is that they slightly idealize the situation. The majority of them belong to the wave of immigration from 1980s, 1990s, and this means that their vision is slightly distorted now. But nevertheless, they do much, and their support is very important. Ukrainian informational sources are not numerous, and I would like to mention in the first turn Ukrainian Crisis Media Center, which remains an important source for people. Also Kyiv Post, Vox Ukraine, and unfortunately for the policy makers and experts who know Ukraine, there are some professional publications, but for general public opinion, They are able to watch Sputnik TV, Novosti, Russia Today. They have a good picture. They have many attendances in YouTube, and they are able to represent alternative point of view, as they call it. That is, they are open for those people who are who somehow disagree with either Democrats or Republicans, and of course, we should do something counter Russia Today, and engage those people who are dismissed from this publication, or who who disagree with the policy of this channel, and who retire from this channel. And in the United States, we should organize some information for those who come here, because those journalists who come here for just 2-3 days are probably unable to understand the situation wholly. And I believe that the structure of those articles should be offered by Ukraine. And of course, I do not wish to say that Ukraine tomorrow will immediately become better than Russia today, but I believe that we should do everything possible to prevent such slips of the tongue as civil war, which is applied for Donbass events. But this actually is able to create public perception, wrong public perception. What information should be emphasized in news coverage for foreign media audience? For the United States, an opinion of non-partisan, unbiased people, independent people is very important. They're interested in the opinion of the third sector. For the United States, the status of a person is important. If anybody is a member of the local, let's say, or village council, then they take the opinion seriously. This is what is important for the Europeans, while the Americans, they pay more attention at what people think. If information makes sense, if it is objective, if you are offered to forecast something and this forecast becomes true, then you will be a reliable source of information for the United States. Of course, they will assess everything from the American national interest point of view, and I believe that we should offer unbiased, unprejudiced information, and make connection to the interests of the United States. For example, anti-corruption work, and how the American assistance is spent for this purpose. Of course, the American taxpayers are very much interested how their money are spent in Ukraine, and information of this kind might be interesting for them. Yamats Maria, UCMC. to what extent the opinion from academic community like Timothy Snyder, like Mr. Fukuyama, influences the public opinion in the United States, if there is any influence. Thank you for good question. I believe that think tanks and research centers play leading role in decision making in the United States. If you are president of the United States and during your mandate as a governor, you once visited in Ukraine, and you are to make, and now being a president, you are to make decision whether to provide Ukraine with military support or weaponry. In order to make this decision, you need to get in advice and consultancy from the think tanks or research centers. Usually those think tanks, they unite people with diplomatic background and with academic background. Of course, Mr. Heritage Foundation, Brookings System, Atlantic Council, they carry out huge research about Ukraine, and their advice and it might become decisive in making solutions about in finding solutions as to Ukraine. And influential world leaders cannot make decisions without a piece of advice provided by those centers. And in order to get the advice which is favorable for us, we should get access to these researchers and to these think tanks, because quite often the Russian intelligence and they bring rather controversial statements about Ukraine to the research centers and think tanks. If you're a journalist, you can easily get access to those centers or to the press conferences. Sometimes journalists ask questions like, for example, do you know that because of the civil war in Ukraine, many Russian-speaking people were killed? And this formulation of the question is disputable and provoking. And sometimes you might hear this at the press conferences. Those who are more deeply involved into the topic, they understand that these manipulations. And my last question, you mentioned that the next step for the ongoing year will be opening representative offices in Washington and New York. What do you think will be your KPI showing that you have implemented your objectives, and that in December next year you would be able to say that you are doing good job? Our objective is to provide advice to the to different levels of the U.S. authorities. Maybe that's not our objective at the governmental level, but this is our objective at the professional level. We are representing not so much the interests of the state machinery, bureaucratic Ukrainian community, but we are representing the people of Ukraine, and we wish to be the voice of Ukrainian people. Of course, we would like to familiarize the Americans, and my dream is to bring staffers of Senator Kaine and some others who do great job for Ukraine. They do not speak neither Ukrainian nor Russian, but actually these are those people who prepare all the materials on Ukraine. They cover very interesting stories about Ukraine, and I believe that these are those people whom we should bring to Ukraine and to show them Ukraine, because they already have made much to Ukraine. I believe that this two-side bilateral cooperation is important. Thank you very much. We'll be happy to have those staffers and senators if you manage to bring them to Ukraine. We wish you a lot of success and aspiration in this work. The national briefing from the National Guards of Ukraine will be at noon sharp. Thank you.